The Book of Esther, Chapter 1. Now it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus. This was the Ahasuerus who reigned over 127 provinces, from India to Ethiopia. In those days, when King Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan the citadel, that in the 3rd year of his reign he made a feast for all his officials and servants, the powers of Persia and Media, the nobles and the princes of the provinces, being before him. When he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom and the splendor of his excellent majesty for many days, 180 days in all. And when these days were completed, the king made a feast lasting 7 days for all the people who were present in Shushan the citadel, from great to small, in the court of the garden of the king's palace. There were white and blue linen curtains, fastened with cords of fine linen and purple and silver rods and marble pillars. And the couches were of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of alabaster, turquoise and white and black marble. And they served drinks in golden vessels, each vessel being different from the other, with royal wine in abundance, according to the generosity of the king. In accordance with the law, the drinking was not compulsory, for so the king had ordered all the officers of his household, that they should do according to each man's pleasure. Queen Vashti also made a feast for the women in the royal palace, which belonged to King Ahasuerus. On the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded Mehuman, Bithta, Harbona, Bivka, Abachka, Setha, and Carcas, 7 eunuchs who served in the presence of King Ahasuerus, to bring Queen Vashti before the king, wearing her royal crown, in order to show her beauty to the people and the officials, for she was beautiful to behold. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command, brought by his eunuchs. Therefore the king was furious, and his anger burned within him. Then the king said to the wise men who understood the times, for this was the king's manner toward all who knew law and justice, those closest to him being Karshana, Shetha, Admatha, Tarshish, Medes, Marsana, and Memucan, the 7 princes of Persia and Media, who had access to the king's presence, and who ranked highest in the kingdom. What shall we do to Queen Vashti, according to law, because she did not obey the command of King Ahasuerus, brought to her by the eunuchs? And Memucan answered before the king and the princess, Queen Vashti has not only wronged the king, but also all the princes, and all the people who are in the provinces of King Ahasuerus. For the queen's behavior will become known to all women, so that they will despise their husbands in their eyes when they report, King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti to be brought before him, but she did not come. This very day, the noble ladies of Persia and Media will say to all the king's officials that they have heard of the behavior of the queen. Thus there will be excessive contempt and wrath. If it pleases the king, let a royal decree go out for him, and let it be recorded in the laws of the Persians and the Medes, so that it will not be altered, that Vashti shall come no more before King Ahasuerus, and let the king give her royal position to another who is better than she. When the king's decree which he will make is proclaimed throughout all his empire, for it is great, all wives will honor their husbands, both great and small. And the reply pleased the king and the princes, and the king did according to the word of Memucan. Then he sent letters to all the king's provinces, to each province in its own script, and to every people in their own language, that each man should be master in his own house, and speak in the language of his own people.
Chapter 2. Sometime later, when King Ahasuerus raged and cooled down, he remembered Vashti, what she had done, and what was decided against her. The king's personal attendant suggested, let a search be made for a beautiful young virgin for the king. Let the king appoint commissioners in each province of his kingdom, that they may gather all the beautiful young virgins to the harem of the fortress of Susa. Put them under the supervision of Agai, the king's eunuch, keeper of the women, and give them the required beauty treatments. Then the young woman who pleases the king will become queen instead of Vashti. This suggestion pleased the king, and he did accordingly. In the fortress of Susa, there was a Jewish man named Mordecai, son of Jair, son of Shimei, son of Kish, a Benjamite. He had been taken into exile from Jerusalem with the other captives when King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon took King Jeconiah of Judah into exile. Mordecai was the legal guardian of his cousin Hadassah, that is Esther, because she had no father or mother. The young woman had a beautiful figure and was extremely good looking. When her father and mother died, Mordecai had adopted her as his own daughter. When the king's command and edict became public knowledge, and when many young women were gathered on the fortress of Susa under Hagai's supervision, Esther was taken to the palace into the supervision of Haggai, keeper of the women. The young woman pleased him and gained his favor so that he accelerated the process of the beauty treatment and the special diet that she received. He assigned servant handpicked female servants to her from the palace and transferred her and her servants to the harem best quarters. Esther did not reveal her ethnicity or her family background because Mordecai had ordered her not to make them known. Every day Mordecai took a walk in front of the harem's courtyard to learn how Esther was doing and to see what was happening to her. During the year before each young woman turned to go to the king Ahasuerus, the harem regulation required her to receive a beauty treatment with oil, myrrh for 6 months, and then with perfumes and cosmetic for another 6 months. When the young woman would go to the king, she was given whatever she requested to take with her from the harem to the palace. She would go to the evening, and in the morning she would return to the second harem under the supervision of King's eunuch Sajaz, keeper of the concubines. She never went to the king again unless he desired her and summoned her by name. Esther was the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had adopted her as his own daughter. When her turn came to go to the king, she did not ask for anything except what Haggai, the eunuch's keeper of the woman, suggested, and Esther gained favor in the eyes of everyone who saw her. She was taken to King Ahasuerus in the palace in the 10th month, the month Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. The king loved Esther more than all the other women. She won more favor and approval from him than did any of the other virgins. He placed a royal crown on her head and made her the queen in place of Vashti. The king held a great banquet for all his officials and staff. It was Esther's banquet. He freed his province from tax payments and gave worthy gift to the king's bounty. When the virgins were gathered second time, Mordecai was sitting at King's Gate. Esther had not revealed her family background or her ethnicity as Mordecai had directed. She obeyed Mordecai's orders, as she always had while he raised her. During those days, while Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bithan and Teshres, two of the king's eunuchs who guarded the entrance, became infuriated and planned to assassinate King Ahasuerus. When Mordecai learned of the plot, he reported to Queen Esther, and she told the king on Mordecai's behalf. When the report was investigated and verified, both men were hanged on the gallows, which this event was recorded in the historical record in the king's presence.
Chapter 3. After these things, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agathite, and advanced him and set his seat above all the princes who were with him. And all the king's servants who were within the king's gate bowed and paid homage to Haman, for so the king had commanded concerning him. But Mordecai would not bow or pay homage. Then the king's servants who were within the king's gate said to Mordecai, "Why do you transgress the king's command?" Now it happened, when they spoke to him daily, and he would not listen to them, that they told it to Haman, to see whether Mordecai's words would stand. For Mordecai had told them that he was a Jew. When Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow or pay him homage, Haman was filled with wrath, but he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had told him of the people of Mordecai. Instead, Haman sought to destroy all the Jews who were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus, the people of Mordecai. In the first month, which is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast pur, that is the lot, before Haman to determine the day and the month, until it fell on the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. Then Haman said to King Ahasuerus, "There is a certain people scattered and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from all other peoples, and they do not keep the king's laws. Therefore it is not fitting for the king to let them remain. If it pleases the king, let a decree be written that they be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who do the work, to bring it into the king's treasuries." So the king took his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. And the king said to Haman, "The money and the people are given to you, to do with them as seems good to you." Then the king's scribes were called on the 13th day of the first month, and a decree was written according to all that Haman commanded, to the king's satraps, to the governors who were over each province, to the officials of all the people, to every province according to its script, and to every people in their language. In the name of King Ahasuerus it was written and sealed with the king's signet ring. And the letters were sent by couriers into all the king's provinces to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate all the Jews, both young and old, little children and women, in one day on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to plunder their possessions. A copy of the document was to be issued as law in every province, being published for all people, that they should be ready for that day. The couriers went out, hastened by the king's command, and the decree was proclaimed in Shushan, the citadel. So the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Shushan was perplexed.
Chapter 4. When Mordecai learned all that had been done, Mordecai tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes and went through the city, wailing with a loud and bitter cry. He went up to the entrance of the king's gate, for no one might enter the king's gate clothed with sackcloth. In every province, wherever the king's command and his decree came, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting and weeping and lamenting, and most of them lay in sackcloth and ashes. When Esther's maids and her eunuchs came and told her the queen was deeply distressed, she sent garments to clothe Mordecai, so that he might take off his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. Then Esther called for Hatshepsut, one of the king's eunuchs who had been appointed to attend her, and ordered him to go to Mordecai to learn what was happening and why. Hatshepsut went out to Mordecai in the open square of the city in front of the king's gate, and Mordecai told him all that had happened to him, and the exact sum of money that Haman had promised to pay into the king's treasuries for the destruction of the Jews. Mordecai also gave him a copy of the written decree issued in Susa for their destruction, that he might show it to Esther, explain it to her, and charge her to go to the king and make supplication to him and entreat him for her people. Hatshepsut went and told Esther what Mordecai had said. Then Esther spoke to Hatshepsut and gave him a message for Mordecai, saying, "All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that if any man or woman goes to the king inside the inner court without being called, there is but one law. All alike are to be put to death. Only if the king holds out the golden scepter to someone, may that person live. I myself have not been called to come in to the king for 30 days. When they told Mordecai what Esther had said, Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, "Do not think that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. But if you keep silence at such a time as this, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another quarter. but you and your father's family will perish. Who knows? Perhaps you have come to royal dignity for just such a time as this." Then Esther said in reply to Mordecai, "Go, gather all the Jews to be found in Susa, and hold a fast on my behalf, and neither eat nor drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maids will also fast as you do. After that I will go to the king, though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish." Mordecai then went away and did everything as Esther had ordered him.
Now it happened on the third day that Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace, across from the king's house, while the king sat on his royal throne in the royal house, facing the entrance of the house. So it was when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court that she found favor in his sight, and the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. Then Esther went near and touched the top of the scepter. And the king said to her, "What do you wish, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given to you, up to half the kingdom." So Esther answered, "If it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come out today in the banquet that I have prepared for him." Then the king said, "Bring Haman quickly, so that he may do as Esther had said." So the king and Haman went to the banquet that Esther had prepared. At the banquet of wine, the king said to Esther, "What is your petition? It shall be granted to you. What is your request? Up to half the kingdom, it shall be done." Then Esther answered and said, "My petition and request is this. If I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, then let the king and Haman come to the banquet, which I will prepare for them, and tomorrow I will do as the king has said." So Haman went out that day, joyful and with a glad heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, and that he did not stand for or tremble before him, he was filled with indignation against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home, and he sent and called for his friends and for his wife, Zeresh. Then Haman told them of his great riches, the multitude of his children, everything in which the king had promoted him, and how he had advanced him above the officials and servants of the king. Moreover, Haman said, "Besides, Queen Esther invited no one but me to come in the king with the banquet." And she prepared. "And tomorrow I am again invited by her, along with the king. Yet all this avails me nothing, so as long as I see Mordecai, the Jew, sitting at the gate." Then his wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, "Let a gallows be made 50 cubits high, and in the morning suggest to the king that Mordecai be hanged on it. Then go merrily with the king to the banquet." And the thing pleased Haman, so he had the gallows made.
I'll be reading from Esther 6. Mordecai honored. That night, the king could not sleep, so he ordered the book of the Chronicles, the record of his reign, to be brought in and read to him. It was found recorded there that Mordecai had exposed Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's officers who guarded the doorway, who had conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. "What honor and recognition has Mordecai received for this?" the king asked. Nothing has been done for him," his attendants answered. The king said, "Who is in the court?" Now Haman had just entered the outer courts of the palace to speak to the king about impaling Mordecai on the pole he had set up for him. His attendants answered, "Haman is standing in the court. Bring him in," the king ordered. When Haman entered, the king asked him, "What should be done for the man the king delights to honor?" Now Haman thought to himself, "Who is there that the king should rather honor than me?" So he answered the king, "For the man the king delights to honor, have them bring a royal robe the king has worn, and a horse the king has ridden, one with a royal crest placed on its head." Then let the robe and horse be entrusted to one of the king's most noble princes. Let them robe the man the king delights to honor and lead him on the horse through the city streets, proclaiming before him, "This is what the man the king delights to honor." Go at once, the king commanded Haman. Get the robe and the horse and do just as you have suggested for Mordecai the Jew who sits at the king's gate. Do not neglect anything you have recommended. So Haman got the robe and the horse. He robed Mordecai and led him on horseback through the city streets, proclaiming before him, "This is what the man the king delights to honor." Afterwards, Mordecai returned to the king's gates, but Haman rushed home with his head covered in grief and told Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends everything that had happened to him. His advisors and his wife Zeresh said to him, "Since Mordecai, before whom your downfall has started, is of Jewish origin, you cannot stand against him. You will surely come to ruin." While they were talking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived and hurried Haman away to the banquet Esther had prepared.
Chapter 7. I'm reading in Amharic, Ethiopian language. ስለዚህ ንጉሡና ሐማ ከንግሥት አስቴር ጋር ለመጋበዝ ሄዱ። በሁለተኛውም ቀን የወይን ጠጅ እየጠጡ ሳለ ንጉሡ እንደገና ንግሥት አስቴር ሆይ የምትለምኙ ምንድነው? ይሰጥሻል። የምትጠይቂውስ ምንድነው? እስከ መንግስቴ እኩሌታ እንኳን ቢሆን ይደረግልሻል አላት። ከዚያም ንግሥት አስቴር እንዲህ ስትል መለሰች፣ ንጉሥ ሆይ በፊትህ ሞገስ አግኝቼ ግርማዊነትህን ደስ የሚያሰኝ ከሆነ ሕይወቴን ታደጋት። ልመናዬ ይህ ነው፣ ሕዝቤን አትርፍ። ጥያቄም ይህ ነው፣ እኔና ሕዝቤ ለጥፋት ለእርድና ለመደምሰስ ተሸጠናልና ወንዶችና ሴቶች ባሮች ለመሆን የተሸጠን ቢሆን ኖሮ ዝም ባልኩ ነበር። ምክንያቱም እንዲህ ያለው ጭንቀት ንጉሡን ለማስቸገር የሚበቃ አይደለም። ንጉሥ ሳርጤክስስ ንግሥት አስቴርን ለመሆኑ እርሱ ማን ነው? እንዲህ ያለውን ነገር ለማድረግ እስከዚህ የደፈረው ሰው የት አለ? ሲል ጠየቀ። አስቴርም ያ ባላጋራና ጠላት ይህ ክፉ ሐማ ነው አለች። ከዚያም ሐማ በንጉሡና በንግሥቲቱ ፊት እጅግ ደነገጠ። ንጉሡም ከተቀመጠበት በቁጣ ተነሳ። የወይን ጠጁንም ትቶ ወደ መንግስቱ የአትክልት ቦታ ሄደ። ሐማን ግን ንጉሡ ሊያጠፋው ቆርጦ መነሳቱን ስላወቀ ንግሥት አስቴር ሕይወቱን እንድታተርፍለት ለመማጠን በዚያው ቀረ። ንጉሡ ከቤተ መንግስቱ የአትክልት ቦታ ወደ ግብዣው አዳራሽ ሲመለስ አስቴር ደገፍ ባለችበት ድንጋልጋ ላይ ሐማ ተደፍቶ ነበር። ንጉሡም ይባስ ብሎ አብራኝ ያለችውን ንግሥት በገዛ ቤቴ ሊደፍራት ያስገባልን? ሲል ተናገረ። ይህ ቃል ከንጉሡ አፍ ገና እንደወጣ የሐማን ፊት ሸፈኑት። ከዚያም ንጉሡን በቅርብ ከሚያገለግሉት ጃንደረቦች አንዱ የሆነው ሃርቦና እነሆ ቁመቱ 50 ክንድ የሆነ ክንድ በሐማ ቤት አጠገብ ተተክሏል። ይህን ያዘጋጀው ንጉሡን ለማዳን በጎ ነገር ለተናገረው ለመርዶክዮስ ነው አለ። ንጉሡም በዚሁ ላይ ስቀሉት አለ። ስለዚህ ለመርዶክዮስ ባዘጋጀው ግንድ ላይ ሐማን ሰቀሉት። ከዚያም የንጉሡ ቁጣ በረደ።
On that day, King Ahasuerus gave Queen Esther the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. And Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told how he was related to her. So the king took off his signet ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther appointed Mordecai over the house of Haman. Now Esther spoke again to the king, fell down at his feet, and implored him with tears to counteract the evil of Haman the Agagite and the scheme which he had devised against the Jews. And the king held out the golden scepter towards Esther. So Esther arose and stood before the king and said, "If it pleases the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, and the thing seems right to the king, and I am pleasing in his eyes, let it be written to revoke the letters devised by Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, which he wrote to annihilate the Jews who are in all the king's provinces. For how can I endure to see the evil that will come to my people? Or how can I endure to see the destruction of my countrymen?" Then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther and Mordecai the Jew, "Indeed, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and they have hanged him on the gallows because he tried to lay his hand on the Jews. You yourselves write a decree concerning the Jews as you please in the king's name and seal it with the king's signet ring. For whatever is written in the king's name and sealed with the king's signet ring, no one can revoke." So the king's scribes were called at the same time in the 3rd month, which is the month of Sivan, on the 23rd day. And it was written according to all that Mordecai commanded to the Jews, the satraps, the governors, and the princes of the provinces from India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces in all, to every province in its own script, to every people in their own language, and to the Jews in their own script and language. And he wrote in the name of King Ahasuerus, sealed it with the king's signet ring, and sent letters by couriers on horseback, riding on royal horses, bred from swift steeds. By these letters, the king permitted the Jews who were in every city to gather together and protect their lives, to destroy, kill, and annihilate all the forces of any people or province that would assault them, both little children and women, and to plunder their possessions. On one day in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, a copy of the document was to be issued as a decree in every province and published for all people, so that the Jews would be ready on that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. The couriers who rode on royal horses went out, hastened and pressed on by the king's command, and the decree was issued in Shushan, the citadel. The Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal apparel of blue and white, with a great crown of gold and a garment of fine linen and purple, and the city of Shushan rejoiced and was glad. The Jews had light and gladness, joy and honor, and in every province and city, wherever the king's command and decree came, the Jews had joy and gladness, a feast and a holiday. Then many of the people of the land became Jews, because fear of the Jews fell upon them.
The 13th day of Adar came, the day on which the royal proclamation was to take effect, the day when the enemies of the Jews were hoping to get them in their power, but instead the Jews triumphed over them. In the Jewish quarter of every city in the empire, the Jews organized themselves to attack anyone who tried to harm them. People everywhere were afraid of them, and no one could stand against them. In fact, all the provincial officers, governors, administrators, and royal representatives helped the Jews because they were all afraid of Mordecai. It was well known throughout the empire that Mordecai was now a powerful man in the palace and growing more powerful, so the Jews could do what they wanted with their enemies. They attacked them with their swords and slaughtered them. In Susa, the capital city itself, the Jews killed 500 people. Among them were the 10 sons of Haman, son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews: Parsandata, Dalphon, Aspata, Porata, Adalia, Avidatha, Parmasta, Ariasi, Ariadi, and Vezapha. However, there was no looting. That same day, the number of people killed in Susa was reported to the king. Then he said to Queen Esther, "In Susa alone the Jews have killed 500 people, including Haman's 10 sons. What must they have done now in the provinces? What do you want now? You shall have it. Tell me what else you want, and you shall have it." Esther answered, "If it please your majesty, let the Jews in Susa do again tomorrow what they are allowed to do today, and order the bodies of Haman's 10 sons to be hung from the gallows." The king ordered this to be done, and the proclamation was issued in Susa. The bodies of Haman's 10 sons were publicly displayed. On the 14th day of Adar, the Jews of Susa got together again and killed 300 more people in the city, but again they did no looting. The Jews in the provinces also organized and defended themselves. They rid themselves of their enemies by killing 75,000 people who hated them, but they did no looting. This was on the 13th day of Adar. On the next day, the 14th, there was no more killing, and they made a joyful day of feasting. The Jews of Susa, however, made the 15th a holiday, since they had slaughtered their enemies on the 13th and 14th, and they stopped on the 15th. This is why Jews who live in small towns observe the 14th day of the month of Adar as a joyous holiday, a time for feasting and giving gifts of food to one another. Mordecai had these events written down and sent letters to all the Jews, near and far, throughout the Persian Empire, telling them to observe the 14th and 15th days of Adar as holidays every year. These were the days on which the Jews had rid themselves of their enemies. This was a month that had been turned from a time of grief and despair into a time of joy and happiness. They were told to observe these days with feasts and parties, giving gifts of food to one another and to the poor. So the Jews followed Mordecai's instruction, and the celebration became an annual custom. Haman, son of Hammedatha, the descendant of Agag and the enemy of the Jewish people, had cast lots, or Purim as they were called, to determine the day for destroying the Jews. He had planned to wipe them out, but Esther went to the king, and the king issued written orders, with the result that Haman suffered the fate he had planned for the Jews. He and his sons were hanged from the gallows. That is why the holidays are called Purim, because of Mordecai's letter and because of all that happened to them. The Jews made a rule for themselves, their descendants, and anyone who might become a Jew. At that proper time each year, these 2 days would be regularly observed according to Mordecai's instructions. It was resolved that every Jewish family of every future generation in every province and every city should remember or observe the days of Purim for all times to come. Then Queen Esther, the daughter of Abihail, along with Mordecai, also wrote a letter, putting her full authority behind the letter about Purim, which Mordecai had written earlier. The letter was addressed to all the Jews, and copies were sent to all the 127 provinces of the Persian Empire. It wished the Jews peace and security, and directed them and their descendants to observe the days of Purim at the proper time, just as they had adopted rules for the observance of fasts and times of mourning. This was commanded by both Mordecai and Queen Esther. Esther's command confirming the rules for Purim was written down on a scroll.
King Ahasuerus laid tribute on the land and on the islands of the sea, all of the acts of his power and might, and the full account of the high honour of Mordecai, to which the king advanced him. Are they not written in the annals of the kings of Media and Persia? For Mordecai the Jew was next in rank to King Ahasuerus, and he was powerful among the Jews and popular with his many kindred, for he sought the good of his people and interceded for the welfare of all his descendants.